that's first hit from the first beer, and then it takes 2 beers, and then it takes, I'm not a beer person, but, or the meth hit, or there's a tolerance, frequency and tolerance has to go up to get the same reward. And I was a classic example of that. So some of us are susceptible to these food-like substances, and I was one of those. Not everybody is. Not everybody's an alcoholic. But I was that person. I want to show you this true story. In the post-Christmas a couple years ago, walking into the grocery store, you shop the outer perimeter, and it was a grocery cart loaded with on-sale candy, and I'm going to enlarge this so you can read what this says. I bent down because it said beat diabetes. I thought that was rather amazing that the candy was in that, but this is what the American Diabetes says. Obesity and insulin resistance is the risk factor for type 2 diabetes. It's not the consumption of excess sugar. Wait, Dr. Boz, what? What's wrong with that statement? Dr. Simus, if you're here, or any other medical professional, that is the problem. That leads. And I had to stop taking a picture. And I know people are thinking, just buy the candy, why are you taking a picture of the whole cart? But here's the problem. Sugar is tricky because it's sticky, right? It's sticky. Have you ever given your kid a lollipop or candy cane or, heaven forbid, a thing of chocolate in the backseat of the car? And it sticks to every part of them. Guess what? Sugar has an affinity for protein. Whether it's on the outside of your skin, or it's the lining of your vessels, or it's your joints. It's called glycation, and Dr. Boz did an excellent job talking about that yesterday. There's these things that happen when sugar sticks to proteins inside of our body, this glycation. It changes and inflames those cells, and it produces what's called advanced glycation end products, AGE. Age. It ages us. Okay, I haven't gotten to the intestines yet, but we're going to get there. But it's tricky. They've uber processed it. It's now a frankenfood, and our body just takes it in and goes, sucks it up and goes, oh, that was great. Let's have some more. And it's just a cycle, which is why I don't go back there. So let's talk about insulin sensitivity, which is what we want to be, versus having insulin resistance. And I'm not going to be scientific. I'm going to do something that those of you that know Robert Sykes know, that he just had his new baby, his wife and he. And I want you to think of these cells that are going to be very prone as we age and eat uber-processed food, frankenfoods, to become insulin resistant. So these new parents, what happens when the baby cries? I used to lay down on the floor next to my daughter's crib, so if she cried, I was right there. I was so sensitive to her, right? To her needs. So the baby cries. You pick them up. All right, now think of parents with several children. Yeah, they've been crying. It's just been 30 minutes. It's all right. Because you're what? You're resistant to the immediate gratification. So I wanted to give you a cartoon to show you. Mommy, this is insulin knocking at the door of my cell, because it has what? I've eaten again. Mommy, mom. Have you ever seen this cartoon? You've got to watch it if you haven't. And she's just laying there like, what? No. And when she finally responds, when the insulin is high enough that it finally says, what? The baby says, hi. And the insulin actually the cell finally, the receptors are finally like so tired of saying no, they're like, what? And they're like, incoming glucose. And they're like, you just ate. What's going on? Anyway, so that's insulin resistance in a nutshell. So now let's get into my talk. All right, let's start talking about those F's. The human body is incredible. It's like the most amazing computer, microprocessor. It's responsive. It's all this artificial intelligence and all this stuff we hear about rolled into our body, and it responds to internal and external stimuli. We're now going to cover each component. No. But I do want you to know that you are intricately and wonderfully made. And when we eat something, our body is simply going to respond to it. So when we eat, we actually, what we're doing, have you ever gotten a new, blender? And you open up the box and inside there's an instruction manual? Yeah. Every bite of food I put in my mouth is literally an instruction manual. And it says to that intricate body, she has eaten this, and here's how you handle it. And the algorithm says, okay, that's what I'm going to do. So what we eat, I want you to think of it, when we're feasting, that we are going to take into our body these foods, and what's going to happen is these components are then broken down, because they can't use that piece of steak. It needs to break it down to amino acids and the fat, the fatty acids. So they're sorted, they're used, or they're stored, or it exits the factory. It can't just stay there. It's used, stored, or it exits, okay? So I want you to think of your fat cells as saved calories. It's like having a solar powered thing, and you save all that energy in the power bank for an outage, okay? So that's what fat cells are. That's in case of a famine. When we don't eat, we're also giving our body instructions. And Dr. Boz did such a great job last night showing that when we eat, and glucose is anything with carbohydrates especially, insulin comes out, and it goes, I'll take care of this. And insulin's pretty much a bully. Insulin, in the presence of insulin, which comes out, we always have a little bit in our blood, but when it comes out in response to food, it's a bully. And it says to all that stored energy in the fat cells, nope. We're going to push more in. Mama. And only when insulin drops are the fat cells liberated. I've been set free. Insulin has gone home. I can now, because we still need calories. We need energy while we sleep, but we can't use our stored fat when we're constantly eating. So that's why the fasting is so important. That's why intermittent fasting for me was just sleeping. And I now have these accidental, I haven't eaten since, and you forget to eat, which has never come into my mind prior to 6 years ago. So, food for thought. What we eat or don't eat is the other important trigger. Not if we eat or if we don't eat, what we eat. A calorie is not a calorie is not a calorie. It's a fantasy, because whatever I eat, I'm giving not only my body instructions for what to do with it, it then turns to the hormones, glycogen, insulin, any one of a number of other things, and it will then also respond. So it literally is a science experiment. Well, it's not an experiment. Your body knows what to do with it. It has problems with a lot of the chemicals and the additives and the preservatives and the things that are so chopped up so fast. So we have to give up that fantasy that counting calories, like I think Dr. Saga said, the body doesn't know what a calorie is. It just works with what you give it, and it's either you're feasting or you're fasting, and you're giving it things it recognizes and needs, or you're giving it things in excess and it's going to store it. So what's that really mean? Macronutrients. Or do you track your macros? All that means is, are you first aware that every food you put in your body is protein, fat, or carbohydrates, or a combination, and then there's all the chemicals and additives, we won't go there. They each have a certain number of calories, which is simply an experiment that was done in the lab to see how long it took to burn up a gram of fat. Just don't worry about the calories, but just know that when I put a macronutrient into my body, those three main macronutrients, the body has an algorithm in its microprocessor, and it says, okay, I know what to do, unless we've damaged it so much with overuse. Then there's the micronutrients. So macros all have calories, 4, and 9. And the micronutrients are the potassium, the sodium, the magnesium, the manganese, the copper, the iodine. Those don't have calories. And we want nutrient-dense foods. Whole lecture on that, but we won't go there. So now, when we think about that, we've now realized that we're going to put food in our body. Instructions for use. The body says, I will follow those rules because that's what you gave me. And now it's going to process it. I want you to think about this. If we could see every virus and bacteria that we're touching, this is why washing your hands is so important, we would freak out. Literally, there's millions, even on your skin. It's called skin flora. So our GI system, it has to take that outside food that we're giving it, and in a protected manner, it has to take the good stuff, excrete the bad stuff without killing us. Because it's going to go into my bloodstream. It's going to go into my cells. And that's why this stuff about food safety and well-cooked food and all that stuff. But let's talk about what is the GI tract and how can something, I want you to think of it as a big tunnel, and it's allowing the outside world access to my inside of my body. And I want it to do it safely. I want it to take what it needs, and I want it to excrete what it doesn't. So I want you to think of it as a hollow insulated tunnel that allows the outside world to pass through your body. And the food enters that complex structure. It's broken down into viable and usable components. I think I'm funny. You'll have to, I amuse myself sometimes. You have to laugh with me, but it's pretty funny. The macro and micronutrients, I'm looking at what I'm saying. It's a disassembly line. It's not an assembly line, it's a disassembly line. It's disassembling. I laughed before I even got to the punchline. It's a disassembly line, okay? It always gets better. The non-usable components, the fiber and the feces, exits the building. Oh, it gets better, it gets better. And because it is a factory, it's a disassembly factory, there's emissions. Flatulence. Now, what are your teenagers going to call it? Especially the boys' farts. All right, so you belch or you fart. Belch is eructation, and flatulence is farting or passing gas. All right? Emissions. Anyway. So we must maintain good gut health to keep the good stuff moving into our cells and the bad stuff out, and that's where a lot of this other stuff comes in. So if you want to, just break it down. We have our receiving, our shipping, our disassembly, the handling, and then the delivery system. Some to the cells and some out into the potty. I know. Anyway, so the GI tract. GI is short for gastrointestinal. All right, you can go to a GI doctor, you can go to a colorectal doctor, you can just go to a proctologist. There's all sorts of ists that deal with the GI system, but it starts with your mouth. And we're going to do a really, really brief survey of this. We're not going to have time to delve into much of anything, but let's start with mouthing off. Really, it's 44 years as a nurse. I have no other explanation of it. But anyway, we're going to mouth off a little bit. All right. In the mouth, when you take that very first bite, you're going to have the beginning of digestion. There's mechanical breakdown, and there's the beginning of a chemical breakdown, and that's where digestion begins. We have teeth, and whether we bought them or we were born with them, and what we do with those is we'll take a bite, whether we're biting from the meat itself or the food itself, or with a fork or a spoon, and what we're going to start to do is we're going to start to break that into smaller components. Hopefully not the Rottweiler syndrome, right, where we inhale it whole, as Dr. Sivas was talking about. But we want to have this begin, and we want to chew it well. That's really important that you take your time and chew your food well. If any of you follow me for any period of time, I talk about a 20 chew challenge, where I ask you to chew your food 20 times each bite. Do I practice that every time? No. But why do I want you to chew? Why should I do a better job chewing my food well? I'm going to talk to you about the stomach and other components, but if I don't give it a chance to be broken into small components, it hits my stomach like a lead brick, and then my stomach has work to do it was never intended to do, to start to break it down. And remember, it's a disassembly line. So we need to adequately chew to moisten the food, to begin to let the enzymes in our saliva start to work on it, mostly amylase. If you take a bite of, I don't care what it is, strawberry, back when I used to eat white bread, but take a bite of it, chew it, and let it roll around inside your mouth. All those taste buds that are located there, you'll actually feel it or taste it get sweeter, because the amylase in your saliva is starting to break that down. And it's literally starting to digest it in your mouth, and you increase so you get to enjoy your food more. Satiety begins with your chewing. It really does begin with chewing. We want it to become a pulp, all right? We want to be able to, when we swallow it, for it to be a bolus of sort of a mushy stuff. And our salivary glands, which are, look, have you ever salivated when you smell, or you even walk by a bakery? They produce saliva, which has enzymes, mostly amylase. And this moist pulp makes it easier to chew and swallow. When I chew my food and swallow it, if you've ever felt food get stuck in your throat, where it feels like it's stuck there, oftentimes we haven't taken the time to really chew, or we're trying to talk and swallow at the same time. So here's some food for thought. Even this is funny food for thought. Spit's our friend. Do not tell your teenage son this. Spit is our friend, okay? Or your grandson, all right? But it is our friend. 2 to 4 liters a day. Look at a 2-liter Diet Coke or something, or 2 liters of water, and you tell me we can produce that much. That's amazing. And that's because it's that important. And it can start when we smell it, we see it, we're even thinking about it. This is called the cephalic phase. I've heard Dr. Ken talk about this quite a bit, where the brain says to the body, there's probably food coming and we should get ready. And insulin says, I'm here for you. I'm coming out. I smell donuts. And you literally will start to not only salivate, but you'll start to have an insulin prep. And it's going to start to come out and say, oh, I'm here. I'm ready for it. So that's very, okay. Those of you who are in the medical community in this room, I know I'm not speaking correctly all the way, but I'm trying to make it simple. Okay? Amuse myself, otherwise I put myself to sleep. Anyway, so the enzymes are going to ambush the mush in your mouth. And then you're going to swallow it, and you're going to take your time about this, and that allows that bolus of food to slide down easily. And where does it go when it leaves the mouth? Hopefully not into the lungs. That's called aspiration. And that's why you shouldn't be talking and laughing when you swallow. But anyway, the esophagus. So we've left the mouth, we're going down the esophagus. Think of it as a laundry chute, okay? It's a tube-like smooth muscle. It really, from the point of me putting something in my mouth and me chewing and me pushing it back to the back of my pharynx, the back of my throat, that's all voluntary. From the point I swallow, the rest of it is involuntary. The body takes over. It says, I've got it from here. I've got it from here. It connects the oral cavity to the stomach. It's moistened. The rest is involuntary. And there's this movement down and out of the smooth muscle contracture of the rest of my GI system. And the medical term for that is peristalsis. Down and out, down and out. That's the job, that's the job. If you've ever had vomiting, that's when it reverses engines. That's when the peristalsis is pushing it out through your mouth because something there is wrong. Either you've got a stomach bug or the food was tainted, and it says do not let this digest because it's got a lot. If you've ever had food poisoning, and if you don't get it out fast enough this way, it's going to shush down the banana peel mountain on, Crisco mountain on banana peel slippers, and that's diarrhea. Diarrhea is where peristalsis is working too hard. Vomiting is where peristalsis reverses engines, and it comes out through your mouth, okay? Isn't this just lovely? And we're going to go eat after this. Now, it travels down this hollow tube, this laundry chute, has to pass through the, it's like going through a tunnel, like our lungs are on either side, but it's not in part of our thoracic cavity, but there's a muscle that separates my thorax from my abdominal cavity, and that's called the diaphragm. Have any of you ever been told you have a hiatal hernia or heard of someone that has one? As the esophagus passes through, there's a series of little one-way doors, if you will. They're round muscles, like a lens of a camera, that open and shut like this, and they're called sphincters, right? One of my favorite words, if someone irritates me, is don't get your sphincter in a knot, right? Don't get your, I know. So much fun. So it travels down the sphincter, the pyloric sphincter, esophageal sphincter. What it does is it'll open as it senses the bolus coming down. It goes whoop, whoop, and it opens and shuts like that. All right, and that muscle. Now we're down into the abdominal cavity, and it's going to go into the stomach. So it empties into the stomach. Let's just watch. As a food bolus, as you swallow it, it slides down, and it's so much fun to watch. So as you're eating today, I want you to remember this. That when I swallow, and if I haven't chewed my food well, it's going to be big chunks of this, right? So I want to chew my food well, and I enjoy the experience. I get to enjoy my family or who I'm eating with. So we should have smooth passage. If you've got problems with esophageal varices or Barrett's esophagus or other things, a lot of problems with GERD, gastroesophageal reflux disease, GERD. Okay, that's a problem. But you've got this little glottis in the back of your throat that opens. It's really synchronized. It's like synchronized swimming, but it's synchronized swallowing. So the glottis closes to shift the food into the esophagus instead of the trachea. The esophageal sphincter opens and closes, allowing the bolus to enter the stomach. And the only time we think of it, of our esophagus, is if something gets stuck. We have a hiatal hernia or we have GERD. So it's now down into the stomach. Sorry about that. The stomach is not purple. It's just the graphic I found. Dr. Boz, I'm so jealous of all your graphics. So it enters down into the stomach, which is now a hollow pouch. And if any of you have ever wondered about what happens when they do any type of gastric bypass or sleeve gastrectomy or things like this, you can check with Dr. Sivas. But this stomach is a very interesting organ in that it has 3 layers of muscle. It's very interesting, and it has these layers because it needs to be able to stretch omnidirectionally. So we have 3 layers of muscles, longitudinal, we've got sort of horizontal, and then we've got like these tangential muscles, and they allow us to have this muscle expand and then contract as it continues to aid in the digestive process. So that's sort of an outside view of the stomach. Inside, so we've got, like I said, mentioned the esophageal sphincter, we've got the pyloric sphincter down there, and while we're eating, it's always synchronized, swallow, open, shut, churn, churn, open, shut down in the pylorus, and it should all be regulated. And that's one of the reasons if we eat too quickly, a little bit later on, we're like, oh God, I'm so stuffed and I can't breathe. Why? Because now this poor stomach is so full that it's pressing up on your diaphragm, and you're like, how many of you ever loosened your belt? Or stood up to breathe so I'm expanding so my diaphragm is up higher so I have room. But inside the stomach is fascinating too. I've got all these little ridges and valleys. And what they do is they're able to expand. It's like a wrinkled tablecloth that when we eat a large meal, it sort of flattens out and expands. And what's really, this whole thing is fascinating to me, but I'm weird anyway. So the little blue lines that just appeared here on your screen, that's to symbolize our diaphragm. And it needs to stay tight around the esophageal sphincter, that muscle. So if you've ever been told that you have a hiatal hernia, something here has weakened at the esophageal sphincter, and it slides up. Part of the stomach actually slides up above, sort of nestled between the lungs, and you get that feeling of fullness. My mom used to call it her burp thing. She could press there and cause herself to burp because she would have this sliding hiatal hernia. And it's just a function of a weakness of that sphincter muscle and other things that go on as well. So that's interesting. If you've ever heard of having reflux disease or GERD, and I'll get into this in just a minute, I'm going to take it away my next statements here. Once it enters the stomach, that sphincter closes. The esophageal sphincter, it stretches. Guess how many? We can make 2 to 4 liters of saliva a day, and we can also hold 2 to 4 liters of food in a non-resected stomach. That's a lot, right? Do we need to maybe if I'm OMAD, right? Maybe if I'm 1 meal a day, but yeah, It has stretch receptors, duh. I have to give them time to signal the brain. When I eat too quickly, I overeat because I haven't chewed my food. All these things that we're talking about it all. Did I know all this for the first bit of my nursing journey? No. I mean, I knew what the stomach was, but I didn't. I used to work in the OR. But I didn't understand the importance of chewing and satiety and letting those sensors and the stretch sensors. Interesting. We have, remember, it's a tube from the outside world in. And I have enzymes. Enzymes like you put on your clothes to break up food particles. These enzymes digest the food. It's called mucosa. There's this protective layer from the moment things are inside my mouth all the way through out the anus, through the rectum. And it's called mucosa. And this mucosa changes. Have you ever had a canker sore? What happens if you put lemon juice in your mouth with a canker sore? Right? The mucosa is our protective slimy. Take your time. Look, oh yeah, that's mucosa. The mucosa in my mouth is different than the mucosa in my esophagus. That's different to the mucosa that lines my stomach. And it's important to know that when I have things sort of move it in the wrong direction, the different enzymes and acid levels, the pH, can cause some damage if they go where they shouldn't. The food, I want you to think of, our stomach, I want you to think of that as our decontamination tank. Because of all the bacteria and outside things that are in the food that we put on our fork that may or may not have been washed really well in a buffet. Just saying. So that decontamination tank is there to protect us, right? It's there to protect us. It's very acidic. That's why if your gastric contents reflux up into your esophagus, the difference in mucosa will start to burn the esophagus. That's why you feel that burning. The mucosa is different. The pH in the stomach is more acidic than battery acid, to make it really simple to remember, okay? It does several things. Low acidity is very, very difficult for bacteria to live in. I work in wound care, it's my full-time job. And the lower a pH is, the more unlikely it is that a wound will become infected. There's products that we use to intentionally lower the pH of the wound fluid to naturally kill bacteria without having to use topical antiseptics. So it breaks down and kills the bacteria that might be in your food. It begins the digestive process, and it's fascinating how acidic it is. What the stomach does, we've got all these acids, the acidic environment, we've got a few more enzymes coming into play here, and now it starts to, like a washing machine. It starts to really move the food around and continue the digestive process. And what's interesting, when we look at all those little hills and valleys that stretch out, this is just a really geeky thing to look at about what happens and how close our blood vessels are to this food. I don't want bacteria-laden food in my circulatory system. I want it to stay in the GI tract until it's broken down to components that are supposed to be absorbed. I don't want bacteria to come in from my stomach. And there's a lot of problems that can happen with the stomach, but our stomach is really yearning and churning. It's yearning to digest your food. It's churning. Have you ever heard somebody's stomach gurgle? Especially if they're hungry. It's like, I'm ready. Just come on, bring it. And so we put this water in, or we put our liquids in, or we put our food in, and there's this symphony, the synchronized opening and closing of all these sphincters. And when it works well, we don't have reflux, we don't have a hiatal hernia. Things stay there as long as they're supposed to. And then the sphincter down at the pylorus, which is the base of the stomach, opens up when it's time. And it's like when they count how many people come into a restaurant, it'll open up and it goes, okay, that's enough right now. And then it'll open up and it'll say, okay, that's enough right now, because it wants the food to move downhill. I hope this is making some sense to you. So when we have GERD, that gastroesophageal reflux disease, the sphincter at the top, the esophageal sphincter, lazy, weak, damaged, whatever you want to call it in a non-medical term, it doesn't stay tightly closed, or I fill up my stomach too much and it sort of pushes it open, and I get a little bit of what's in your stomach back up into the esophagus. And it can be scary if it happens at night and it's a fair large amount. You take a breath. I've had it happen a couple of times when I was heavier, and it literally gets almost, you aspirate it and it burns and it chokes. It's a big deal to have GERD. It can really be anything from a nuisance to pretty scary because of aspiration thoughts, especially as you age. So if we think about how acidic my stomach acid is, and then it's there to kill bacteria and to help start the digestion of food, and we've maybe got GERD, and we go and first it was prescription for all acid blockers, the proton pump inhibitors, and now they're over the counter. How much of it is our friend, and we're taking them without really understanding the reality of the downstream effect of what it does for our digestion? I'm not talking about all this stuff about gastric cancer and the other things that can happen potentially with that. But deep prescribing medication, as Dr. Boz and Dr. Sivas and Dr. Berry and others want to do, is oftentimes one of the best things we can do, especially if what we have to do, all we have to do, is understand how food impacts us, and then take the steps to alter what we eat so the instructions are different so our body functions better. Does that make sense? Every single drug you take, even aspirin or Tylenol, has some sort of side effect, and it can be toxic, okay? So just be aware of that. I'm not telling you to get off your proton pump, please don't, all right? But be aware that many people, their symptoms decrease or diminish or go away because they've changed what they eat. And as you lose the weight and there's less visceral fat pushing up, you're just going to have less mechanical force trying to push the stuff up into your esophagus. Now, let's leave the stomach alone. Let me see what you're going to have. Oh, I got to move fast. Small intestines. Don't confuse small with short or unimportant. Small intestines are important. Short people are important. It's only half the diameter of the large intestines, but it's about 22 feet long. That's a lot, all right? Why? Why is it so long? Because it's so important. This is where the actual majority of our absorption, rest of our digestion and absorption of the nutrients and the micronutrients occurs. And it is vital that we understand this and that we give our small intestines this chewed up little pieces and let the stomach do the rest so we can actually get the nutrients from what we are eating. We want to get the nutrients from what. There's 3 different areas: duodenum, duodenum, tomato, depending what you call it, jejunum, and the ileum. And almost all of our nutrient absorption happens here. And this is not a small thing. Small intestine, small thing. I see it. Too late. All right. So here's a nice little picture. They're not these colors, of course. And they're like a little squiggly bowl. And they do their different functions. And I won't belabor this. You can take screenshots if you want. They're going to record it. But the duodenum is the first part. If you've ever heard of someone having a Roux-en-Y or ileojejunal bypass, a lot of this digestion is bypassed to aid in the weight loss, which why, Dr. Saitis, I think most of the time you like to do the sleeve, the sleeve gastrectomy, so you're not impacting this very important part of the absorption of the nutrients. It's the mixing bowl. This is where, that stuff that comes out of the stomach is sort of, they keep mixing it up. And the major work of actual digestion, not absorption, but digestion occurs here. And this is where bile comes from your gallbladder. And bile is a slurry, if you will, of good things that help you digest your fat. All right, help it from giving you, and that's where people that have had a gallbladder removed will oftentimes have diarrhea for a while, because instead of being able to bolus out the bile, I digress, it's dripping in. So it's not that the bile stops being produced, that's made in the liver, but that's where the bile enters from the gallbladder. Jejunum is where the bulk of your absorption, so think the first part that where the rest of the digestion occurs, but absorption happens a lot in the jejunum. That's why a lot of people with ileojejunal bypasses, depending on how much of the jejunum they bypass, is where you're having problems with malabsorption and problems with your digestion. And this is where this chyme is further broken down, the slurry. We'll just call it slurry. All right, so fats go into fatty acids and glycerol, proteins get broken down into amino acids, and our carbohydrates, glucose, fructose, lactose, depending what ose you've eaten. Fructose from fruit, lactose from milk products, glucose from, and sucrose, it's a long story, sucrose, and I only talked to you about table sugar, so because I'm running out of time. The ileum is the longest part of the small intestines, and this is where the digested particles flow past it towards the large intestines, and we have increasing water absorption. A lot of your B12 is absorbed here. So if you have trouble with B12 absorption, you can take it sublingually, or you can have an injection of B12 if you're having trouble with B12 absorption due to surgery or problems. And then all of this on top of it is the liver, and it's sort of hugging everything. It's going to the stomach. I love you so much, and I'm here for you, because the liver is such an important part of what's going on. There's only a few functions listed here. There's literally dozens and dozens more. It makes and secretes the bile. It stores our glycogen and lipid reserves. It maintains our glucose, our blood glucose. Think of this as the glycogen, amino acids, all this stuff. It synthesizes and releases cholesterol, which is actually extremely protective. We need it. We need it. Our body makes about 80% of our cholesterol in the liver. It insulates it's the insulation around our nerves. I could go on and on. All of our soft liver or any type of liver, that's what it looks like. Do not buy liver in the grocery store that looks like the one on the right. It used to be in medicine, the only time we saw somebody with fatty liver was they were a drinker. They were a drinker. Now we're seeing non-alcoholic steatohepatosis. We're seeing, it can progress all the way to cirrhosis. I didn't put in all the, but it's like foie gras, like Dr. Thank you. Yeah, like Dr. Boss. I'm thinking you with that tube going down, and all I could think was, that was her. Anyway, talk about that. But this non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, or NAFLD, or the NASH, and we literally are killing ourselves with what we eat. Do you know that so many young adolescents have fatty liver disease now because of all the fruit juices, because fructose can only really be metabolized in the liver, that we are going to potentially get to the point that people that need a liver transplant, we don't have enough healthy donors. Why? Mostly because of what we eat. There's some, environmental things, but mostly because of what we're choosing to eat, because no one told us it did all this. Okay, there's the gallbladder tucked up under the liver. It's really important to help squirt bile. Pancreas, I don't even have time because I went too long. pancreas is important, right? Most of the rest of our enzymes are produced here, as well as insulin. My daughter Rachel, who's 40 now, is type 1 diabetic from the time she was 3. She had an autoimmune response to the chicken pox. She's been on insulin since then. She doesn't make it, so we have to give it to her. She has an insulin pump now and a CGM and all that stuff, and they cross-talk to each other. But when we begin, and you can get a fatty pancreas just like you can do a fatty liver. And we can have all sorts of problems, but it's more than I have time to talk to you about. But I want you to just know that all of these things I've talked about, all of these things are going to respond to what we choose to eat. They don't just like to think, well, heck, I got nothing else going on. It's going to respond to what we put in our mouth. And so we have that power. With knowledge, we can change what we put on our fork, and we have the power. I haven't even gotten into leaky gut, but inside the lining of our intestines, we have all these little humps, right? These little villi, peaks and valleys, peaks and valleys. And if I spread it out, it'd be about the size, I don't know, maybe half a football field inside your intestines. It's amazing. But these cells, and Dr. Boss mentioned this last night, these cells that protect the inside of us from the food we've put from the outside are 1 cell thick. 1 cell thick. And they have what's called tight junctions. Hold my hand really nice and tight. Tight junction, right? When I eat inflammatory food or that sugar that is so tricky because it's so sticky, I start to inflame those cells. Those junctions start to loosen, all right? And so they start to go, oh no, all right? And I get leaky bowel, so, whole nother lecture. But it causes all sorts of problems because now things that are supposed to be exiting out of our anus are leaking into our intestine, not our intestines, our circulatory system, which is right here. What we eat matters. What we eat matters. I just love these drawings. See that? The purple is the 1 cell thick, and inside we've got the little capillaries. Capillaries are where arterial blood flow trades out to venous flow. I say that arterial blood brings in the groceries, venous flow takes out the trash. And I want that to happen intentionally. I don't want things leaking into this. I don't want this whole problem as you start to, as we see that the tight junctions we see here start to be separated.
A very good morning, ladies and gentlemen. At this time, we kindly ask the following guests to please proceed to the guest services desk located on deck number 5. Mr. Cameron Beatty and Mr. Ross Grunman Beatty from deck number 7.
Tight junctions, they're disrupted, they're supposed to be spaced.
Oh, things can leak into it, all right? And Dr. Boz spoke last night about autoimmune. I have immune defense. It's my soldiers, my National Guard. They're called to defend me. They get confused when things start entering in here and other things that can happen. And they say, oh, invader. And they start to attack us. Our own body turns on us with autoimmune. And it continues to not only, as she said last night, replicate, it gets like sensitized to other things. People with one autoimmune, it's not uncommon for them to develop others because of that just sensitization. So a lot of things can happen with this. The inside the gut, I want tight junctions. I want things to be used as I expect them to. But when I have this inflammation, a lot of times, from what I've eaten, it can be drugs that, there's all sorts of things that can happen there. But I want to have as healthy of a gut as I can so that the food I eat does what I want it to do. It goes in, is used how it should be, and it doesn't get where it shouldn't be. It's like the kids should be kept here. It's not safe for them to play in the street. So we want things to stay as they should. And Dr. Boz did such a great job about yesterday during her lecture about your hemoglobin A1C. And how that's that predictor of these top, I think it was 8 out of 10 things that can kill us. And if we just look at this chronic inflammation, if you ever had a splinter in your finger, that itty bitty little splinter, and you feel it get red and inflamed, I want you to think of that sticky, tricky sugar as inflaming you. Little splinters all inside your joints, your vessels, impacting how your liver works, impacting how your pancreas works. Because if I can help you become even a little bit more aware today of the power of what you put on your fork for your overall health, Yeah, I've released 94 pounds, but it's the health. It's my longevity. The only people in my family who've been always obese that have not gotten cancer, to our knowledge, is myself and my brother. Sugar is a killer. It really is. And the more processed foods we eat, and I'll close with this, I'm sort of at the end anyway, large intestines. So the large intestines are called, you can call it the colon. We have our ascending, our transverse, and our descending. It goes up, across, and down. So if you've ever felt crampy right before you get diarrhea, you can sort of feel it traveling and then traveling across and then traveling down, and you better run to the toilet because it's coming out. That peristalsis is on hyperdrive. And so that I can't eat onions for that very reason. We talk about IBS. I had to take most of those slides out. But I want you to, instead of thinking it as IBS, which it's irritable bowel syndrome, is it really irritable food syndrome? That there are certain foods or additives or things that I can't eat. Mine's onions. Onions, shallots, leeks, onion powder especially, found out about 35 years ago by being placed on an elimination diet. And when I avoid onions, I'm fine. And when I don't, oh my word, my body cannot process it. I have an irritable food syndrome, colon, right? So this is where your water absorption happens, and that's why a lot of people that have had colon resections, especially my brother who's had it done twice, has a lot of diarrhea because the colon's gone. Therefore, the water absorption isn't happening. Therefore, he has more liquid stools. And that's what diarrhea is. It's where you haven't had time to absorb the water out of your colon, your gut, your large intestines, whatever you want to call it. Your poop becomes more solid as it passes through. It's down and out here. And I want you to know that your colon's filled with bacteria. There's good, there's bad, and the ugly. And they're not all bad. We need that good gut flora. They help protect us. They help produce serotonin. They do a lot of things with our immune response. A good amount of your feces or your poop is dead bacteria. They have died giving their life for you. So, fiber, fermentation, flatulent feces. There's soluble, insoluble. We don't have time for it. Soluble can be broken down, insoluble passes through. That's the corn that someone was talking about the other day, or the spinach, just like whoop, right on through. There it goes. There's an intricate fermentation process that happens. If you know about cows, if you ever heard Peter Ballerstedt, the sod father, talk about ruminants and how multiple stomachs or the large colon of an ape, and how they're meant to be able to take these non-digestible things and turn them into something digestible. We don't have the right colon for that. And so a lot of times we get a lot of flatulence and feces, and maybe we need it, maybe we don't, but anything that ferments gives you gas bubbles. Okay, let's say this again. Anything that ferments produces gas. Right. So if you're eating a lot of fiber and you have a lot of gas, maybe you should cut that back a little bit. Because there can happen, and they can be malodorous. They're not all SBD. Well, some of them are SBDs. All right. I digress. So many carnivores report they're no longer full of hot air. Really goes away. Okay, so the rectum and the anus, and then we're done because we're at the end of our digestive tract. Let's talk for just a minute about constipation. So many people are worried that they're not having X number of bowel movements a day. All right? The medical terminology for this, the definition is you're having less than 3 bowel movements a week. Less than 3 bowel movements a week. Increased dehydration can happen when you are truly constipated because it sits there in your colon, and the colon absorbs water. So the more it absorbs, the drier it gets, the more compacted it gets because things are still moving downhill, right? The rectum and the colon can become filled with feces, and the dehydration continues. Impacts women twice as often as men. The men just talk about it more. Activity helps. And so fiber, is it necessary or can it be problematic? I want you to take a picture of this. There is a stool chart made by the folks in Bristol. It's called the Bristol Stool Chart. So if you ever go to your doctor and you say, I'm constipated, he or she may say, why? Because I've got type 7. No, that would be diarrhea. No, I've got type 1. It's like little rabbit pellets. All right? So that's severe constipation. All the way down to severe diarrhea, which is type 7. So this is when you know someone really wants to be published. Those of you that in academia will get that. But anyway, it's publish or perish in academia. But anyway, so here's the Bristol Stool Chart. this is how you can describe it without being too graphic. I don't want to hear the color or anything. I've got type 4. All right. So all right. So what puts us at risk for constipation? And then I'm pretty good. I've got 4 minutes. Smoking, certain medications, a sedentary lifestyle, dehydration. Fiber may help, may hurt. And I will tell you that if you've built a beaver dam of poop in your colon, and you take a laxative, a chemical one especially, that's going to hurt. It's just like dynamite blowing it up. So be careful. You may not want to increase your fiber if you're already constipated. If you think you need some fiber, get yourself into a non-constipated state, and then consider doing that. Please don't ignore the urge to get Believe it or not, we get little signals. And they're called colonic peristaltic movement. I think I might have it on the next slide. No, I don't. But we get, maybe I do, about 6 times a day on average, you'll feel that little bit of pressure down in your rectum. And if you pay attention to it, and if you go to the toilet right away, like within like a minute or two, and you let that movement of the colon, that peristalsis happen, it should be pretty easy and straightforward, all right? So don't ignore that urge. Non-drug options, because I'm not a doctor, I can't prescribe. Increased movement. Fred, it's not stretching, I know it's contraction. Where'd Fred go? He might have left, I was probably, okay, he left, he's like, oh God, I can't stand this, he's just full of poop. Anyway, so, contract, it's really good to stretch, get that stuff moving, get out of bed, stand, bend, stretch throughout the day. Don't become dehydrated, and don't just drink water. Electrolytes are so important. Sodium is going to retain water in your colon, thus keeping your stool soft. A stool softener will help pull fluid into your colon, thus softening your Bristol stool chart. Warm water may be helpful. Consider decreasing or stopping your dairy for a couple weeks. That constipates a lot of people. Increase your sodium, magnesium, especially magnesium citrate. Anybody know milk of magnesium, the little mom's little helper in the blue thing? It's magnesium. Citrated mag in the blue glass bottle. It's magnesium. People said, can I take too much magnesium? Yes. You'll know it. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. It's a smooth muscle relaxer. It just goes, ooh, yeah. Okay. So increase your sodium, your magnesium, MCT, as Dr. Boz mentioned last night. You drink that MCT oil too fast, it's like those banana peel slippers on Frisco Mountain. It just slips and slides right on in. It really does. So don't ignore the urge to go. Here's something interesting, and of course I'm a nurse, so I don't care. I'm gonna talk about everything. I'm on the toilet. I'm not. All right? Don't lean forward excessively. You're going to pinch that off. All right? Try to sit up fairly straight. You can rock back and forth if you need some help sort of getting things down where you want them. Consider a stool where you put just like a potty squat where you have your knees up higher. Don't ignore the urge to go. Never sit on the toilet more than 10 minutes at a time. If it didn't need to be, it ain't going to be. Just get up, move around, because you're going to predispose yourself to more problems with hemorrhoids if you do. And relax. Breathe deeply and slowly. Stay hydrated, etc., etc. So feces happens, all right? The longer it stays in, the more it's going to pack up, and then you're going to have a difficulty letting that sphincter down there at the anus. Rectum, it nearly killed him when he did get that. No, never mind. It's a joke. I can't help myself. I got 27 seconds. Okay, so I already said that. I might have gone the wrong way. When things go wrong in the colon, there are things like Autumn talked about. So the diverticulosis, which we all have some diverticulum, IBS, Crohn's, ulcerative colitis, they're a huge problem. But keto foods, because we've decreased a lot of those chemicals we've given our food, a lot of those like additives, and we've given our body foods that it knows what to do with, a lot of your symptoms can be managed, and that's my timer. So we've talked about a lot of stuff. Thanks for staying until the end.